Ali was a new English language learner in my morning ELD class. He was inquisitive and was a hard worker, and I thought he might be a good candidate for my afternoon International Baccalaureate Theory of Knowledge course. I approached him about it, and he was intrigued, but he wasn't very confident in his English proficiency, so he decided that he would just stick with his existing class schedule. I asked him to think about it, but I didn't have a whole lot of hope that he was going to change his mind. A few days later, I taught a lesson in the growth mindset, Carol Dweck's growth mindset concept. Simply put, growth mindset is about looking at problems as opportunities to learn and recognizing that our intelligence is not fixed at birth, that we can grow it through effort. At the end of the lesson, I asked students to write down some reflections, and later in the afternoon I saw that Ali had written, "I'm going to show that I have a growth mindset and take Mr. Falazzo's IB class." I think that story illustrates why social emotional learning and the academic content of the Common Core standards do indeed go better together. I think without SEL, it's like having the lyrics without the music. Sir Ken Robinson, a British author and speaker on education issues, has said that farmers and gardeners know you cannot make a plant grow. What you do is provide the conditions for growth. And I think that's what social emotional learning does for the academic content of the Common Core standards. It creates the conditions in which students can best engage with that academic content. But this idea isn't just coming out of my head. The authors of the Common Core standards themselves say the same thing. The Council of Chief State School Officers, one of the primary authors of the Common Core standards, suggests that learning and teaching SEL skills along with the academic content of the Common Core are mutually reinforcing. And they issued a report saying that, and the other authors of the Common Core standards agree. They recognize what all good teachers know, that unless students feel supported and motivated, it's unlikely that they're going to want to engage in academic content. Here are some of the skills and dispositions, as CCSSO defines them, of social emotional learning that they believe are critical for students to acquire in order to learn the Common Core standards. And I'm going to go over several of them in this presentation and share how they can be reinforced in the classroom. But first, it's important for us to clearly know and recognize that most of our students have these skills already, and in fact, many of them have more of them than we do. And I've had students, and continue to have students, who have traveled on their own from Central America on the top of freight trains to the United States. They've certainly got plenty of persistence. I have students who immediately after school each day had to rush home and take care of their younger siblings for hours until their parents return home from work. They've got plenty of self-control. And I have students who work the night shift every day, every night, in order to provide family income. Again, they've got plenty of persistence and self-control. So I think the challenge to us, to educators, is to help students figure out how to apply the skills they already have to academic endeavors. And the other challenge to us is to create classrooms where students feel like they want to do that. It's a matter of looking at students that are students through the lens of assets and not deficits. Goal setting is one of the strategies, the SEL strategies, that CCSSO, again that's the Council of Chief State School Officers, recommend for reinforcing with our students so they can learn the Common Core standards better. This is an example of a goal setting sheet I use with my English language learners. And again, it's important to keep in mind that we're talking about student-created goals, not goals that teachers set for students. It's also important, I think, to let students be aware of what research shows about the difference between learning and performance goals. So a learning goal is I want to read a book that has more complex vocabulary. A performance goal is I want to get an A in this class. And what research shows is that those who focus more on learning goals actually outperform those who emphasize performance goals. So I think that kind of research is important to make sure that our students are aware of it. It's fine to have them identify goals for both, but we want to make sure that they're clear which ones they should focus on the most. Metacognition is another SEL skill that CCSSO recommends. Metacognition is thinking about our thinking. It's recognizing what our strengths are and being aware what our weaknesses are and how to compensate for them. I use a simple lesson to introduce metacognition in my class. When students come in, they see the word metacognition on the whiteboard, and I tell them, they're very familiar with my bragging about my 3-point shooting on the basketball court. So I tell them that today, with this garbage can in the front of the classroom, I'm going to demonstrate my abilities. I roll up a piece of paper, crumple it up, throw it overhand, miss it to the right. Students go wild. Tell them, calm down, relax. Now, I saw that I threw it overhand and I landed on the right. Now maybe what I can do, maybe it's best for me to throw it underhand to give it a little bit more of an arc. And I just got to move my aim a little bit to the left. I do that, throw another piece of crumpled paper, miss it. It gets a little closer to the garbage can, but it lands on its left side. Students go wild. Tell them, calm down. Okay, now I see I just overcompensated. Let me try again. I throw it. It goes in. I go wild. And I explain to students what they just saw was metacognition in action. Metacognition is reflecting on what you've done, both well and not so well, and apply those lessons so you can do better in the future and next time. I ask students what they think would have happened if I had just thrown 3 crumpled pieces of paper, one after another, without thinking about what had worked or hadn't worked in the past. And they generally correctly say, well, it's unlikely any of them would have gone in the trash can. After that lesson, we begin to make a list of what metacognitive strategies that they could use in the future. They copy it down, we make a big poster. Here are some of those strategies. Learning journal is one strategy I particularly like, and many teachers, including myself, have had learning journals where students write down what was the most important thing they learned today, questions they have. But in metacognitive journals, it's a question of writing down what helped me learn today, what strategy helped me learn, and what didn't. Critical thinking is another SEL strategy emphasized by CCSSO. Assisted discovery learning and teaching has been found by Robert Marzano, who wrote very favorably about a meta-analysis that showed that it is, in many situations, is much more effective than direct instruction. And one type of assisted discovery teaching and learning is inductive teaching. In inductive teaching, we give students examples, and then out of those examples, they have to identify what the concept or rule is. In deductive teaching, we give them the rule or the concept and then a bunch of examples that they have to work to reinforce it. One example of inductive teaching that I particularly like is called concept attainment, where you have two columns on the whiteboard or the overhead. One says yes, one says no, and you have a bunch of yes examples and a bunch of no examples. And students have to identify why those are yes and why those are no. For example, a list of claims. Why are these good examples of claims? Why are these bad? Or evidence. Why are these good examples of evidence? Why are these bad? Another way to reinforce critical thinking is based on the work of Paulo Freire, a well-known South American educator, famous for his concept of critical pedagogy. A progression that I use in the class, particularly with my English language learners, based on his work, is to show an image or a video of a particular problem, let's say a child being bullied on a playground, and ask students, what is the problem? Have they ever experienced it? Do they know others who have experienced it? Why do they think the problem exists? What are potential solutions to the problem? What is the best solution and why? Another way to reinforce critical pedagogy in the classroom is something I do in my history classes, is have students create what-if projects. For example, what if George Washington had died at Valley Forge? Creativity and creative thinking, another skill emphasized by CCSSO. Lots of ways to reinforce that. One way is called the constraints principle. It's also known as the green eggs and ham hypothesis. Supposedly, Dr. Seuss's editor asked him to write a book just using 50 words, and out of that came green eggs and ham. So you can do a found poem. I've often had students create 12-second Instagram videos explaining key concepts. The random principle, putting things together that might ordinarily appear disconnected. An easy way to do that is to give students words and have them to figure out what kinds of ways to create similes and metaphors out of them. Agency, another strategy emphasized by CCSSO. So agency is feeling that you have control over your life and recognizing that there are outside conditions and factors that can limit or affect it, but recognize that you can choose your response to those outside factors. A number of ways to develop agency, self-talk. Stephen Curry, the Golden State Warriors star, is in a well-known YouTube video in a free throw shooting contest with his coach Steve Kerr, and you see and hear him saying to himself, "Control your destiny, control your destiny." Students teaching others, doing jigsaw exercises where students teach portions of an article or a concept, and then contributing to others. I've had students who have organized job fairs based in the school for themselves, their families, and the greater school community. Had classes who have taught other classes about the rights that they have if they are stopped by police. We talked earlier about the growth mindset, and oftentimes growth mindset and grit or perseverance are talked about together. We want to make sure that we don't communicate that growth mindset and grit just means working harder. That researchers behind the concepts emphasize that this formula for success is effort plus strategies plus help from others. When we think about these SEL skills, it's important to remember that it's not just a matter of teaching a lesson and that's it. If we teach a lesson about growth mindset and tell a student that they're dumb, or even think that a student is dumb, it's not going to be very effective. It's something that needs to be reinforced by our actions day in, day out. SEL is not a panacea. It's a tool. And it's certainly not what some proponents of SEL, most notably New York Times columnist David Brooks, feel, who think that it is a replacement for making the policy changes that are required to deal with the socioeconomic challenges facing our schools, our students and their families, including racism. It's not a let them eat character strategy. But it can be an effective tool. I was telling you about Ali at the beginning of my presentation. A few weeks after entering my IB Theory of Knowledge course, he decided that he liked this kind of stuff, being intellectually challenged, and he could do it. So he transferred to all IB classes and is now a successful candidate for the International Baccalaureate diploma. So it's not a panacea. SEL is not a panacea, but it's a tool, and it can be a darn well effective one.